Hello, welcome back to the 8th plot. We're doing another Minecraft video today, continuing our long-term build with of the Ark from Stolen Futures. And so today I'm going to do something on the top level of the Ark. So if you've read the story, you kind of know that there's essentially 3 levels, actually maybe 4. So there's the underbelly of the Ark where all the water that the Ark tried to steal is kept. Then there's the sort of engine room level, and then you have cargo bay level, residential level, and then finally robot storage, but also a bit more storage of other stuff too. So I'm going to try and fill this area, but Minecraft doesn't really allow me to build like lots of small robots because of just, the blocky nature of it. So I decided instead to build one big robot in the space to represent the robot storage area. And this is a robot called Heston, who is going to be appearing in the 3rd book, which will be released soon after this video, I hope. Just needs to go through the final editing phase. And Heston's one of my favourite robots on the Ark, created for the 3rd book. He's a cheerful sort of character, although I don't want to spoil too much, I guess. But he's basically, it looks like, I don't know, I guess you'd say he's got the sort of body of R2, but he's definitely not R2-D2 in any way, shape or form. Got a long, several tentacle-like arms that come from his body, and a sort of storage area inside of him where he keeps food and drink. And that's about all I'll say for him. I'm going to let my red avatar sort of clear out the space at the top of the Ark and start construction. And while that's going on, I thought I would read to you a short story. You can find this story on the website, my website, www.mjury.co.uk, and this is going to be Illarion's story. So I'm trying to fill out the sort of lore of the series with every single Arkonaut that I can sort of envision, giving their the story of their life from the moment they found out they would survive on the Ark after the Earth was destroyed, and give their sort of life story from that point forward up until they are teleported onto the Ark. Because they've all got sort of unique stories to tell. They're all spread around the whole planet, and the world is experiencing different kinds of destruction and civil unrest and natural sort of disasters because of what the Destroyer is doing. So Illarion, who is the Russian representative, will tell his story of when he was trapped in the Kremlin, where he was sequestered before being teleported to the Ark. So this is the story of what happened to him in the final the remaining few weeks left of the Earth before the Destroyer would, spoiler alert, destroy it. So this is written from Callum. Callum narrates the story from his perspective. So, but Illarion's going to talk throughout. So just bear with me as I read through the story. And in the background you can watch Heston being built by my avatar. So let's get right into it. Illarion's story. I seem to recall that you said once you were sequestered in the Kremlin, I suddenly said to Illarion, who was sitting across from me in the cafeteria. It was a random statement to make, as we hadn't really been talking about anything up to that point. However, I realised that he had mentioned this before. It just popped into my mind, and I hadn't asked about it. I mean, it had to be cool, right? To be safely kept in the central government building of your country, especially one as iconic as the Kremlin. However, although I certainly wouldn't have wanted to be holed up in number 10 in all honesty. But number 10 is not the Kremlin, and I want to know everything that happened to him there. Illarion was just chewing on a piece of bread, and he stopped and looked at me. He swallowed the bit he had been munching on and said, "So? The Kremlin?" Ivalio interjected, who was walking past with her tray of food. She then placed her tray down and sat next to Illarion, forgetting about her dinner and staring straight up at him. What was that like? Illarion looked at me, then her, but offered up nothing. "Come on, Illarion, tell us about it," I said. He looked at us both again, then finally caved. When I was chosen to be the Russian representative on this gigantic grey trash can, at first I stayed with my parents at our house. I did the usual back and forth I guess we all did with Dr. Ghost's people. To get the induction and all the nanite shots. Then about 2 months before the end of the world, I was brought to the Kremlin to be safe. With the Moscow River now a small trickle, much of the city was empty. with most of the population moving to the frozen north where water was still locked in ice in abundance. The government had control over the military to some extent, and so was still in control of the country a little bit. However, there were elements of the military that were not under government control. Instead, they were under oligarch control. Oligarch control, I said. Yes, they... Oligarchs? Myra said, who was also passing by, and she stopped. What are we talking about? She asked. We're talking about Illarion's time in the Kremlin, I said. Myra sat down next to me. I hate oligarchs. In US, we had plenty of our own. All those dot-com billionaires and weapons manufacturers. They were still influencing the government even up to the very end, getting tax breaks in the form of water. You had oil oligarchs in Russia, right? Yes, great. Back to my story, Illarion said. Now, you don't get rich by not noticing shifting tides in economic fortune. After the Cold War, Russian oligarchs made billions on oil. However, when that primary resource ended its influence and the world craved water more than oil, the oligarchs started to plunder, hoard, and control its distribution, keeping them rich. They brought General's Corporation and fitted out whole armies to protect their assets. So what, they tried to take over the government? I asked. Not all. Most oligarchs were on the government side. However, one was a bit dim, not really good at seeing the writing on the wall, and he had lost lots of money by foolishly buying up all the oil businesses his fellow oligarchs had got rid of in order to focus on controlling the water. He saw a bunch of guys selling their businesses that he thought were still profitable. He didn't realise they were practically worthless. No one needed cars, really. Petrol wasn't what people needed. No one was going to waste water putting it in the radiator of a car. Planes didn't need kerosene because no one could fly in the thinning atmosphere. People didn't need to heat homes anymore. With reduced water in the atmosphere, the sunlight was getting stronger. The world warmed faster. So he lost lots of money, and he blamed the government for not propping up his business, especially when he had given them so much money in the past. He never really got it. He's like that old American president who thought coal would make a comeback. So he used what was left of his fortune to hire mercenaries, and he attacked the Kremlin. In the chaos, I guess he wanted to seize control of the government, and I don't know, rule it himself, to make changes that would shore up his businesses once again. Like I said, an idiot. My family were living quite well, up until that point, when one day tanks started to surround the building and they turned their weapons inwards. Every single gate of the Kremlin was destroyed, blasted off its hinges. Boom! He said, and his hands reenacted the explosion. Other Arkonauts stopped when they heard his mimicked explosion, and they started listening in too. My dad went to the window and saw troops who had been disguised as civilians suddenly throw off coats and blankets and rush the broken gates. Soldiers guarding the building were in disarray and were cut down by heavy gunfire. My dad then gathered me up, my older sister and mother, and rushed deeper into the building. Officials tasked with keeping us safe were trying to escort us to more secure locations inside the government building. As we were moved from one part of the complex to another, it seemed like we were barely missing the gun battles erupting around us. In the end, total panic swept through the Kremlin, and my family were taken in by mercenaries. Adults were separated from children, and me and my sister were placed in one of the bunkers at the base of the fortress, constructed during the Cold War to keep the presidents of Russia safe during a nuclear strike. We were down there for days, fed and given water at irregular intervals. News reached us that the government still had control over small parts of the building. The oligarch who had paid for this was in charge of the official communications network, and apparently he was broadcasting propaganda and government secrets. Really old government secrets too, even stuff on Putin. I don't really know why he was doing it. Maybe he thought it would give his coup d'etat legitimacy? In a way, I didn't mind this state of affairs. I knew that soon I'd be teleported away. We weren't being used as hostages, so we just had to wait it out in that bunker with my sister, who was watching over me. She was nearly 18, and she understood that I had to live, so protected me. How did she look after you? Myra asked. We didn't have guards inside the room. The door to the bunker was just kept shut most of the day. The room turned into a sort of Lord of the Flies situation, with the bigger kids on top and the weaker kids at the bottom. Me and her were close, and we'd had a few fair fights during our childhood, but she was far tougher than me. I'm very strong and very big, yet I take a bit of time to think about my actions and the consequences. That delay works poorly in a fight. We were both like animals. I was like a big dog, capable of putting up a fight, yet I was domesticated. I assessed and waited and was cautious. He smiled for a moment at only a memory he knew. My sister, though, was like a grizzly bear mother, with something constantly between her cubs and her, always angry, and seemingly always ready for a fight. She was protective, and it didn't matter what you were or who you were going down if you were between her and me. She was the older sibling. She understood that she was going to die, and I was going to live, but she wasn't going to die a coward. That much she had promised herself. I was her wingman, and she always led the way into battle while we were in that bunker. She kept me from starving and losing water. She refused to help any other kids in the bunker, even the weaker ones who sought protection. She knew they were as good as dead, and I was the only one to get out there alive in the end. I really respected her for that. I could see that it hurt her to make such decisions, but she was taking the logical course and keeping me alive, and she was my big sister. Eventually, though, she realised a big problem. "What?" Ogwambe asked. "Yeah, what?" said Sabu and the others, all standing around listening in. The bunker was built to protect people from a hydrogen bomb, from radiation. So there was no phone signals, no internet, no real communication out of the bunker, other than the official way, which had long been destroyed by the mercenaries. She was worried that the teleportation beam wouldn't be able to lock onto me down here, so far underground. We needed to get out of the bunker, get to the government-controlled areas, so she came up with a plan. We went to the door of the bunker, and outside was a single soldier with a gun. She figured he'd be the least effective, least capable of all the ones in the building. After all, he had been assigned to just guard kids. She opened the door from the inside. I heard the gun the soldier carried click as the safety went off. My sister did something I'd never seen her do before. She smiled at him, behaved all attracted to him, flirty. It was more than enough to get the guard's attention. She stepped out of the bunker, then closed the door. When she opened again, a few seconds later, she was covered in blood and the soldier was dead from several nasty stab wounds. "Wow," Evalio said. Yeah, she was like a female version of one, only more brutal. She was only concerned for my well-being. She led me up from the bunker. We managed to make our way through the empty corridors to a sort of perimeter, the line between the mercenaries and the government's soldiers. There was only one way through, a part of the perimeter guarded by just 2 of the mercenaries. They were at a makeshift barricade of desks and office chairs at the end of one corridor. There was a number of offices lining the corridor, and my sister snuck into one, after telling me the plan. She had the gun taken from the soldier she had killed, and she asked me to draw upon all my acting skills and create a little diversion. So I walked down the corridor towards the 2 soldiers, crying my eyes out. That was harder than most actors make it out to be. But in truth, I had a lot of good reasons to cry. I was sure the end was very near, and I hadn't seen my parents for a week, and probably would never see them again. I never got to say a proper goodbye. I was worried for my sister, and the awful realization that I was leaving her behind. It was enough to bring anyone to tears. The soldiers heard me crying and turned their attention to me. They saw a kid who was bawling his eyes out like a baby. I fell to my knees and waited for them to come to me. They both raised their weapons. They were yelling and screaming, and I refused to move. Their mistake was not checking a side office. Once they passed the door, my sister stepped out and shot one guy in the head. The second turned and managed to get a shot off, clipping her shoulder. I grabbed him and threw him against the wall. He, however, was bigger and stronger than me, so he grabbed me by my clothes and threw me up against the opposite wall. That's when I had decided I had had enough. All of us were listening to his story, held in rapt attention, totally enthralled, and we all said together, "What did you do?" He must have thought that as a kid I was no harm. However, I grabbed the straps of his military combat vest that he was wearing, and like this, he said, and he mimicked holding the man on his vest with his clenched fists. Bam! And Illarion did a headbutt into the space where he all imagined the mercenary was. I headbutted him in the face, and his nose exploded in a gout of blood, he described. My forehead ached, but it was worth it. He let me go. His eyes filled with tears, and he screamed in pain. Then my sister shot him from a prone position on the floor. I then helped her, temporarily bandaged the wound, and all hell broke loose at that point. The oligarchs of Torek had roused the remaining citizens in the city to riot. They were unhappy with him, unhappy with the government. Thousands stormed the Kremlin in a frenzy. Me and my sister had no choice but to climb to the roof. Once on top of the building, she broke the door handle, so we were stuck there. We watched from the roof as the building was torn apart, and then the city itself just collapsed. The destroyer at that moment started its pre-flight systems. We felt the rumblings through the ground as its engines fired up. A crack in the crust of the earth swallowed up half the city. Same happened where I was, I said. Me too, Myra added. There were nods from people all around us. Many of the Arkonauts had experienced the same sort of thing. Illarion went back to his story. Someone then started pounding on the door to the roof. At any moment they were going to break through. Me and my sister didn't know if they were government soldiers, the mercenaries, or raving citizens. Thankfully the teleport started. It felt like my body was there and not there at the same time. I grabbed my sister's hand and held it tight. I thought that if I didn't let her go, then she would be taken with me. I turned away from him for a moment. I've been trying the same thing with my family when the teleport had come for me. I turned back to Illarion and he was wiping a tear from his eye. Other Arkonauts were doing the same thing. We'd all had siblings, parents, friends that we'd wanted to take with us, but couldn't. My sister watched me start to fade in and out as my body appeared in 2 places at once, Illarion said. She hugged me one last time, then stepped away. She turned back to the door and pointed the gun at it, ready to defend me to make sure the teleport couldn't be interrupted. The mob eventually burst through and she fired the gun at them, keeping them away from me, and disappeared right after she ran out of bullets and went hand to hand. Illarion paused. I hope she fended them off. I hope she managed to get back into the building and find our parents and spend her last moments with them. He was almost completely in tears at this point. We all let his final words sink in. I think we all wondered what happened to our loved ones the moment we appeared on the Ark. I think we all presumed they had had final moments of peace rather than horror. After a few moments of quiet reflection, Coiler said, "It's a shame she didn't come with you," he suggested, wiping a tear from his own eye. Illarion wiped his face one more time with his sleeve, smudging his upper lip with a little bit of snot that was sneaking out of his nose. "Why is that?" he asked. "She would have made a great blind date for one," he said. We all chuckled at that. "She would have been too much for him," Illarion said wistfully. We all burst into fits of laughter. "Too much for whom?" one said, strolling into the cafeteria suddenly, his amazing hearing having caught the words from outside the room. Those of us who were standing turned on the spot and walked away, and those sitting down scraped their chairs on the floor. Avalos ended up sweeping her tray of food onto the floor in surprise. "Nothing," we all said in unison, and went our separate ways, hoping he wouldn't add any follow-up questions. I nodded to Illarion and said, "That's a good story. You should be proud of your sister." "I am," he replied. There we go. Illarion's story before he was taken by the teleport that put him on the Ark. A couple more stories on the site if you want to read them from a few other perspectives. Hopefully one day I'll be able to get... there's 250 odd Arkonauts. Maybe I could write 250 odd stories from every single country around the world. I've already done Cortez's and Bay's ones. There's so much more I want to do. I can imagine all kinds of different scenarios for different people around the world. And it looks like I'm finished now with the construction of Heston. You can see this is roughly how he looks. I can't do it perfectly in Minecraft blocks. And if you pick up the third book, it will be out soon. You'll be able to read all about what he does for Myra in the third story. Thanks for watching this video. Please like and subscribe, do all the YouTube things. And have a good morning, afternoon and evening, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for watching.